All right, so to start, I suppose, I met you one time before,
Yeah.
and we had a really great conversation. And I know you were a journalist for a long time, but just in brief, I guess, could you tell us about your professional background, your background with Grand Rapids?
Okay. Well, I worked for the Grand Rapids Press and then subsequently the MLive for roughly almost 38 years. And I covered federal courts, I covered politics, and I covered business. And through all of those different beats I had, I kind of got a sense for the fabric of Grand Rapids power structure and the community. I'm also involved, and we met at my church, Emmanuel Lutheran, which I've also been a member of shortly after I arrived in the community, some now 42 years ago, or actually, no, I'm sorry, 45 years ago, how time flies. And so I've gotten to, I've been pretty involved in the religious fabric of the community too, but separate as a journalist. I never really covered religion as a topic, but I kept bumping into religion, covering politics and courts and business. So that's where my fascination with the relationship between God and money in this town comes from.
And I imagine this developed over time, because I could see if I became a journalist now, I would have certain opinions or thoughts about religion and politics, but 5 years in it'd be different, 10 years in it'd be different, and more nuanced.
Yeah, it became, growing up in West Michigan, I grew up in Holland. I attended Calvin College for 2 years before I transferred to Central Michigan to become a journalism major and all of that. I went to Christian schools, so I was introduced to God early in my life, and it's the influence of the church has been around for a long time.
So we have certain questions that I'm supposed to ask you that we talked about, but I'm very curious about Calvin College, especially with someone as knowledgeable as you. It's sort of a child of the
Christian Reformed
Church. And I have this very particular question that I've asked some Calvin students, current students, and they've just stared at me blankly.
Okay.
The idea that for Calvinists, there's some maybe an ungenerous perspective that they don't believe in free will or choice or this idea of predestination. Is that a real belief that they have, and do you see that as actually controversial or an issue? I personally kind of like the idea.
The absence of free will, or the fact that there is a free will?
The absence of free will makes sense to me. Maybe I don't like it in that it's not comforting, but it makes sense to me. Now
we're getting into theology, and I won't give you the blank stare, but
you've heard this idea before, at least.
But here's I'm a Lutheran now, and here's where my philosophy or theology is, and this comes from a class I took at Calvin in theology or in philosophy. This brilliant philosopher who went on to, I think he's still alive. His name is Alvin Plantinga, who is widely known as the philosopher of God. In my sophomore year at Calvin, I just happened to get into this class with him in which he talked about the existence of God, proofs of the existence of God, and free will. And just to boil it down, if as a believer you believe that your God is omniscient, all-powerful, then why would he, this God, and I use the word he, although my God doesn't have a gender, and if you want to assign a female gender to your God, that's fine. But if God were to create a world in which he was omniscient, all-powerful, and then he placed the created the persons in a human form as his kind of crowning achievement, what would be a more powerful statement than to give this person and every person free will, so that each one of us, you and I, are free to believe what we want to believe, free to behave as we behave, either in good ways or bad ways. But in the end, God's not controlling us. Each of us have a free will. You have a free will to believe or not. You have a free will in a lot of respects to how you live your life. But in the end, as a Christian, I believe God will prevail. And there's evil finds its way into the world. Evil finds its way into each one of our hearts. Yet, in the end, our omniscient, all-powerful God will prevail. And that's what the story of Christianity is about, how Jesus was God who came to live among us, and the Roman authorities in which he lived didn't like him. They viewed him as a threat. The church authorities, the Jewish leaders at the time, didn't like what he had to say. They conspired to kill him, and they did. And as Christians, we believe Jesus rose from the dead after 3 days, as it was prophesied in the Old Testament, and now reigns in heaven, and God won. And we're just all players in this drama. Each one of us has inside each one of us is a war between good and evil, between God and evil, and in the end, God wins. So, but we do have a free will. That is, I think that's very biblical, and it's. Yeah, that's where I'm at.
Great balanced answer. I'm going to turn off the AC.
Okay.
One advantage of doing a lot of editing is the actual filming process is pretty forgiving about interruptions.
That was kind of a long answer.
That's all right.
Okay.
Long answers are absolutely fine.
All right. Well,
I'm just always paranoid about the camera. But
you can't.
One looks like it's doing well.
Yeah, you can't. I mean, that volumes, libraries have been written about this topic, and
That was a short answer. That was a very short answer, given the question.
Yes. But anyway, that's free will.
Yeah.
And like I said, Alvin Plantinga, if you Google him, he was just a brilliant philosopher. The fact that I stumbled into his class, and it was just spellbinding. His lectures, and Alvin Plantinga, look it up.
I have met a couple Plantingas in town.
Okay.
I don't know if they were relations or not, but
They're probably, yeah. It's a family of highly intellectual folks, and Alvin's just one of them.
That's a lot of it does run in families.
Yeah.
So, first question.
Okay.
And these questions are long, but they're also big. And so, again, I don't expect you to have any kind of truncated answer, or you only have so much ability to do that. But the first question is just about, so the Scripture, Old Testament, New Testament, is pretty clear about money.
Right.
About
Jesus was. Yeah, I mean, on his Sermon on the Mount, Jesus clearly stated in Matthew 6, you can look it up, no man can serve two masters. You can't serve God and you cannot serve money. I mean, that's That's pretty simply stated and pretty starkly stated, and yet, we find ourselves, and especially in this community, being very, there's money here, a lot of money, and there's a lot of God here, and there's some real inherent conflicts that play themselves out on a daily basis in the business world and in our churches.
What are those conflicts, and
Well,
how do you see those playing out?
Well, and let me give you an example of a company called Zondervan. Zondervan was created in 1931 by two brothers who started selling books out of their mother's basement, I think, in Granville. Christian guys, and they began publishing a book about women in the Old Testament in 1932 that kind of became a bestseller in Christian circles, and they made some money, and they were smart businessmen. And by the 1970s, they had Christian bookstores around town, and they were pretty popular in selling different Christian books. And this being a fairly religiously oriented town and a fairly intellectual area, they were quite successful. In 1971, they achieved the publishing rights, the North American publishing rights, for a new version of the Bible called the NIV. The NIV
It's the one I grew up on.
Yep, and a lot of people grew up on it because it was considered a superior translation of the Bible, superior to King James, the King James version, which was kind of prevalent at the time, and it was accepted widely among theologians as a superior translation from the Greek and the Aramaic translations of the Bible. It became very popular. Zondervan, having those publishing rights, became very profitable. They went public. They sold public stocks. You could buy stock in Zondervan Corporation, and it was doing quite well. And it was one of the hot stocks of the 80s. Well, in 1984, around, they as a public company, they restated their earnings, and it turns out that they were not as profitable as they had been telling investors on Wall Street. Wall Street looked at this company and saw they restated their earnings and were not as profitable as they said they were, and the stock price plummeted. As the stock price plummeted, the sharks started circling, and there was and this is when I became new to the business beat at the Grand Rapids Press. One of my first big scandals I covered, there was a swashbuckling British investor named Christopher Moran, who was based in England, and he started buying up shares of the stock, and then made a request or made an attempt at a hostile takeover of Zondervan, saying, arguing that I can provide the Zondervan shareholders with a lot more return than they're getting now. All you need to do is, operate it like more of a less of a charity, less of a you just place more emphasis on profits, and I'll be giving our investors much more profits. Well, the Zondervan board in Grand Rapids, used to having a steady return on their sale of, at that time, the world's best-selling Bible, said, no, we're comfortable with what we're doing. We don't need to make a killing on this. And Zondervan said no to Christopher Moran, and of course, in the language of Wall Street, you maximize shareholder value, and the Zondervan people were not necessarily about maximizing shareholder value. They were about spreading the word, using the Bible to spread the good news to the world. And there's that inherent conflict, profit versus mission. During the course of all of this, the institutional investors and the other investors who bought Zondervan stock because it was making money and could care not as much about its mission, began to side with Moran. At that point, the Zondervan family, which owned their stock, still, one of the founders was still alive, transferred or sold all his stock to Amway Corporation, thinking, I don't have the energy to fight this battle, but they will. Because the Amway founders, Rich DeVos and Jay Venando, were viewed as Christian businessmen who had the wherewithal to withstand this hostile shareholder attack. Well, by that time, Amway was large enough that they were really kind of disinterested in getting involved in a big fight over the NIV owners and all of this. And they ended up selling their shares to Christopher Moran. So all of a sudden, Christopher Moran had more money and more power. And ultimately, it ended out, so the Zondervan people were looking for the proverbial white knight who was going to rescue them from this hostile shareholder attack. That white knight ended up being, so they put the company up for auction, or for sale. That white knight ended up being a company called News Corporation. News Corporation, if you do your research, is owned by Rupert Murdoch, the Australian who at that time was making money in every form of publishing. And now Rupert Murdoch, who was not well known as a Christian, and perhaps he is, I don't know, he's still around, and in his 90s, became the world's largest publisher of Bibles. That company, through various transactions, Zondervan also owned something called Family Christian Bookstores, which was a retail outlet for its Bibles and other religious Christian books, and it became a big publisher of Christian books. With some of the profits it made from the Bible sales. So some of the most popular titles in the 80s and 90s in Christian literature were published by Zondervan and sold to Zondervan stores. Zondervan as a publisher, as a Christian publisher, still exists in a much smaller form on Sparks Drive in Grand Rapids, but they're now, the bookstores were spun off into a separate corporation which went bankrupt, as most bookstores did. Thank you Amazon, and some of the larger, stronger chains like Barnes and Noble. So they went into bankruptcy, and most of the store closed. I believe it was somewhere in the mid-2000 teens, and they still have an online presence. But anyway, so that's where God and money kind of found themselves in conflict. And in that case, Wall Street and you could argue won, but on the other hand, Zondervan is still publishing the NIV Bible, and in many versions. One of their successes is to have the the NIV Bible for young women, the NIV Bible for men, the NIV Bible for various different denominations.
Target those sub-demographics.
Yes. You find niche groups and sell the Bible with a commentary that might be aimed at a Reformed reader or a Lutheran reader or a Catholic reader. So they've diversified the NIV base quite successfully. But so like I said, that to me is an example where God and money, really in this community, people try to be faithful to their faith, and they have to be faithful to their shareholders as well. And in this case, you could argue that the NIV is still selling well and still being published, but it's still generating profits for Rupert Murdoch as well. I don't know if that is a good allegory or a good example of God and money in this town, but
very interesting.
Yeah,
very interesting. And if I clip it the right way, we'll be very viral.
Okay.
So there's two things I'm realizing as you're talking. One, I gotta publish this whole thing. There's no way I can do just short form on a story like that. So maybe the lesson here is get better guests who can tell good stories. Maybe that's one of the lessons.
This town is full of stories.
Yeah, if you meet the right people.
Yeah.
I'm sure there's unlimited great speakers with great stories. But I don't know all of them, so maybe I'll need to take some recommendations.
All right.
The second thing is, I guess a lot of these big questions that everyone asks, I hope to meet someone like you and have a nice, simple answer wrapped in a bow.
Okay.
For, what should Christians do about money in modern society? And maybe there aren't simple answers wrapped in a bow.
Well, simple is, money's there to be used, and it's a great tool. It's a great tool for good. It's a great tool for evil. It's a tool. And how you choose to use your money it does boil down to a spiritual question, or it should.
I guess to drive the point home again, the Bible is not. If you look at there's some things like murder or slavery, where the conversation of what does the Bible say about it is actually more nuanced. With money, it's not that nuanced.
Well, it is. It is. I mean,
for example, the most famous story of the rich man coming to Jesus,
right,
and the famous camel through the eye of the needle. Or,
that's an interesting story.
The rich man will fade away, even while he goes about his business.
Right.
Very simple, very clear.
Right. Well, the example of Jesus and the rich young man who gave, "What must I do to be saved?" In that case, Jesus threw out a stinger, if you will, of an answer: get rid of all your stuff. Now, he didn't tell other people to get rid of all of their stuff. He acknowledged people's wealth. He acknowledged the ability where money can do good and can do good. But here is a guy who went to Jesus and he said, "Look, what must I do to get eternal life?" And Jesus said, "Well, obey the commandments of God. That's law. Obey all the laws that God gave us, and you're good to go." Nobody can obey all those laws. And the guy said, "Well," Jesus gave an example. Do not steal, do not lie, do not murder. He gave him a whole list of the do-nots of the law. And then he gave the guy a do. Sell all your stuff, give it to the poor. Do something positive with your wealth. Right up until this point, the guy had looked at all of the barriers. Don't do this, don't do that, don't do that. And he says, "I did none of this. But his heart was still, I've got all this money. And that's where he placed his value. That's where he, placed his self-worth, if you will. And there are a lot of people who still do. They place their self-worth in the size of their brokerage account. And Jesus basically said, put that behind you. Get rid of that. See where, do something positive, do something good. And that's something this guy was not willing to do. And because that's how he viewed himself, as a rich person, as a person who obeyed all the laws and had a lot of money, and therefore was entitled to eternal life. And Jesus said, no, where your heart is, that's where you should be. So even, you and I both have possessions. Jesus doesn't want us to sell all that and hit the streets. On the other hand, Jesus doesn't want us to make our self-worth based entirely on the size of our bank accounts or our quarterly profit statements or whatever. That's not where our head should be at. Our head should be at, what can I do to serve my fellow person, manhood, So that's the point of that story, not just everybody should just sell everything.
So you think the story is a bit more about priorities,
right? Exactly.
With the example given about money,
right?
But it could have as easily been, the modern day version, a degenerate video game addict.
Sure. Yeah. I mean,
and you would say give up video games.
Yeah. Well, yeah, and exactly. That's a great example.
But at the time, that's not who was speaking to him. Kind of wrong.
Right. Yeah, he wasn't a gamer.
Mm-hmm.
But he was gaming the system.
Yes, maybe some kind of a contemporary gamer. Very interesting. So the next question is about one of your main beats as a reporter, politics.
Okay.
And I guess there's maybe the local question and the state/national question, which is the close tie between republicanism and Christianity, which I don't know how recent that is, but I feel like that wasn't the case when I was a kid, at least. Well,
there's a great divide, and there's a book written by a Calvin professor, Christine Dumais, called Jesus and John Wayne, in which she talks about and does a great job as a historian of looking at where did Christianity start adopting some of the love of political power, starting with Jerry Falwell and the moral majority. That was a political movement, not a Christian movement. It's like, hey, we've got all these people who are believers. What if we've created this political movement? We could really get things done in Washington. We could really get things done in Lansing. And she traces how that has taken the gospel of Jesus, of one of humility, service to each other, being kind, being good, and taken Jesus and turned him into kind of a muscle man, John Wayne, rather than the humble servant that he was when he lived among us. I mean, he was a homeless guy with a ragtag band of disciples who thoroughly annoyed the church of the time and thoroughly annoyed the Roman Empire at the time, to the point where both agreed he's got to go.
Yeah, annoy is a light word for how he rubbed the Roman Empire, for sure.
Yes, and the Christian church. I mean, not the Christian church. I'm sorry, that was the
Jewish establishment.
Yeah, the Judeo establishment at the time.
Yeah. So there's, you talk about Jerry Falwell, American.
Right.
Yes. But it strikes me, a lot of the things I've seen, especially in going to all these churches and interviewing them, or I had a whole career as a teacher, so maybe the same thing about schools, that I if there's something I take fault with in a church or the church, defined by whatever boundaries you want to put it. I think, I don't know if it was you, but maybe I had the same conversation at the Lutheran Church, which is, it's, a church is part of a society, and so a lot of issues with the church are issues with society. But it could be even bigger than that, because this tendency for religious leaders and organizations to seek power and money is also a historical thing. I mean, with whatever King James, for example, right? Or whatever King of
It's a
England
constant
splitting off the church.
temptation, yeah.
Or just other religions,
Right.
There's evil cults in every religion.
Sure.
These come up, that temptation to power and money is, I think, a human thing.
Right.
More than just a religious thing.
Which is why Jesus preached about it so much, because he saw that as a big threat to believers. It's a battle, it's a struggle for every person's heart. What do I do to get money? Money makes me happy, money makes me comfortable, and to the point of, to what extent should I use that money I've been given, if I believe it's a gift from God, back to my community, and back to the community of believers, and the efforts to spread the news of the gospel, not the news of Wall Street. But it's a temptation for all of us.
Yeah, before I ask you the next follow-up, I want to double check this. Again, my
Okay.
paranoia knows no ends, and I believe it just switches the file every once in a while, but I believe it was recording, but I just...
Okay.
It'll be at episode number 50, I will start to be a little bit less paranoid,
Yes.
But
Technology is great until it's not.
Yeah, and I've been using a lot of these things for plenty of time, but I've just also had, I'm scarred by very specific, horrible things that have happened where I've had the best conversation ever, and the audio is just unusable, or just the phrasing is just all off, or or by sitting down and trying to edit things, and just the amount of work that has to be done to save some things.
Yes.
So the camera looks good, but we're turning on a backup anyway. And the audio, I don't think I've almost ever loved a product as much as these microphones. It's almost like...
Well, before autosave came along, the word in the newsroom was Jesus saves and so should you.
Yeah, I mean, at least I can get a bunch of backups and it's not that hard, and I press a button and it's that, Certainly, I'm not complaining about the state of modern technology. It's better than it's ever been.
I know.
By orders of magnitude.
As someone who grew up with DOS and wrote out my own HTML codes, have you ever done that?
Well, I've worked in front-end design for about 3 years, so I've written plenty of HTML, but I will say, with the latest iterations of... first you'll just use boilerplate and copy and paste from other people.
Right.
99 times out of 100 anyway, and then do some little, HTML adjustments. But even now, I just have AI do everything because it's good at it. 6 months ago, I wasn't good at it. Now it's good at it. It makes very few mistakes now.
Yeah. It's, it was, I created, I remember my first web page back in the early 90s, when I was exploring this and typing out, HTML// and all that stuff, and then you try, did it work? And then when all of this, Microsoft Publisher came out and all this other stuff, it's like, oh dang, everybody can do this now, and it's not just my exclusive thing anymore.
Right.
That I've taken the time to learn. But anyway.
And coders are going through that same thing with AI.
Yeah.
But I think every new tool coders go through. Oh, a new front end framework. Oh, now everyone can do it. You know.
Yeah.
Oh, now GitHub, everyone's sharing their code. Now everyone can do it. Like that feeling you had. People have felt that at many times since.
But AI, let's face it, is still really dumb. But
I love to hear people's opinions on it. I completely disagree. I 100% disagree.
Oh, you don't think AI is dumb?
I think it's incredible. I think it is certainly more intelligent than any person on Earth by, again, a million times.
Really? Okay.
And it's not. So here's how I think about it. And I think, but even this way of thinking about it, I think is going to lose steam as we move over time. I don't think it's the best in the world at any particular thing. So if you want the best haiku writer in the world, you probably need to find a person.
Right.
But it's better at writing haikus than you or I, and probably better than 99.99% of people there, and it can do it in 40 languages and instantly.
Yeah.
Right? So it can generate you 1 million of them in an hour. So, who's the better haiku writer there? But that's for all poetry. That's for all writing.
Yeah.
So the best essays in the world, I want to read a person writing about it,
Yeah.
But it's better than 99% of people are writing essays.
Yes, and depending on what AI knows and what information AI has access to, and that's the battleground right now, is that, well, if AI wants to use this copyrighted material that I generated and incorporate it into whatever product it's making, I should get a cut of that because it came out of my mind, it came out of my fingers, and I have some ownership claim on that. AI kind of like just scoops up everything and says it's all mine, mine, mine. Well, it's not, and that's the battleground right now, I think.
Well, unfortunately, whatever. I wouldn't want to use that word, but it is the case that it's a battleground about all kinds of things.
Yeah.
So yeah, certainly, I believe how copyright law is right now. It's on the side of people. If you make something with AI, you can't copyright it.
Right.
But still, obviously, we're having a crisis of copywriting and intellectual property.
Right. Well, it's a 1913 act that we're applying, 120 years later or 110 years later.
Time for a rewrite, yeah.
Yeah, but nobody knows where to start, and nobody wants to give it to AI because AI would just say it's all mine, mine, mine.
Sure. Yeah. But I think it's a crisis with everything though.
Yeah.
It's not not related to copyright law, but it's hard to think of anything about work, jobs, media production, education, thinking, a lot of medicine, therapies.
Sure.
I don't know how much it's cut into religion, but I think there's a lot of implications there you could talk about. Does
Sure.
AI have a soul?
Yes. No.
So it's a big thing.
Yeah. But anyway, we didn't. You don't want to hear my thoughts on AI.
I love to hearing everyone's thoughts on AI. I am obsessed with it for good and for bad, I would say. I suppose the follow-up is, talking about God and politics and about how this is sort of something that seems to be interplayed anywhere you have religion and politics and power and money throughout history and, across space as well in different places in the world. The specific example of Christianity and republicanism.
I guess I didn't give a complete answer on that.
And just how you see that in local politics, how do you feel about this? How should people feel about this?
Well, right now in local politics and national politics, state politics, the MAGA movement has hijacked the Republican Party. The Republican Party that I covered in the late 70s when I was working in Lansing for another corporation as their correspondent, for statewide political correspondent. It was a party in which a party of Bill Milliken, person we hear little about anymore, but Bill Milliken was our governor. He was very moderate. He was, you look at in the late 1960s, the EPA, the dreaded EPA, who was created by Richard Nixon. Everybody realized that we were doing bad things to the planet and we needed to stop doing it and we needed to regulate it, and they created the EPA. That was created through the Nixon administration. So the Republican Party that I grew up covering was much different than it is today. Locally, one of my advisor when I was a political science major at Calvin College was a gentleman named Paul Henry. Paul Henry went on to serve in Congress as a state legislator. Paul created the bottle bill, which is why when you go to the grocery store, you take your bottles back and you get 10 cents for each bottle. That was a creation of Paul Henry, very environmentally focused. His successor after he died was another Calvin professor, a physics professor named Vern Ehlers, who prided himself on being an environmentalist, protecting environmentalists.
He was another governor?
What?
Vern Ehlers?
No, he was never governor.
Okay.
He was a state senator who, when Paul Henry died of cancer some 25 years ago, he succeeded. He won the congressional seat and served in Congress, and was very much framed his whole platform on environmentalism. He was also one of the few, and as he would often tell you, he was one of the few scientists in Congress. And like I said, he came out of the Calvin faculty, as did Paul Henry. So it's a much different Republican Party then than it is now. Now you've got Republicans in Congress basically falling in line with whatever the MAGA movement led by Trump dictates, because the fear is that if I make Trump angry, the MAGA movement will find somebody who will primary me, and that'll be the end of me. Peter Meyer being the big example in recent politics. He was our local congressman who his first week in office was the January 6th riot, if you will. I mean, that's...
You look at pictures, videos, what else?
Yeah.
What other word would you use?
Right. And he voted to impeach Trump because of Trump's inaction in defense of these riots. He was primaried, lost the primary, and we've never heard from Peter again, politically speaking. He made a brief attempt to run for Senate, the vacant Senate seat that was vacated by Debbie Stabenow, and that his polling showed him that was getting him nowhere with the Republicans in the primary, and he backed down.
So he was one example that was set for the rest of the Republicans to say, okay, we got to follow.
Yes, I mean, Peter Meyer came from the Meyer supermarket chain. He had money, he had name recognition, but he didn't have Trump, and that was the end of that. He was primaried by a guy who was from outside of the district, a guy named Gibbs, who was won the primary and then was defeated by Hillary Scholten, our current congressional representative in the Grand Rapids area.
So this same question, what is the tie between Christianity and republicanism? It just would have been a less hot or interesting question 15 years ago. Still a history and still something interesting.
Yeah, I mean,
less spicy 15 years ago.
Yeah, and the conflict isn't there. I mean, there are many Christians who are also progressive Democrats. I mean, the Democratic Party is not devoid of Christians. Of course, yeah. You know, I mean, Hillary Scholden professes to be a Christian. Her husband is on the faculty at Calvin College, or Calvin University now, and you'll find some tenets of Christianity ardently preached in the Democratic Party and from a progressive anti-MAGA standpoint. I referred to the book by Christian Dumais from the Calvin faculty. She is very much disturbed by the MAGA movement, and while she hasn't taken I don't think she's a member of the Democratic Party, she certainly is a rallying point for progressive Democrats.
So this question would be very much off script and totally fine to not answer it or answer it and say don't include that, as I'm doing a bunch of editing anyway. But can you be a Christian and be woke? Can you be a Christian and be MAGA?
Yes. It's interesting. I lead a Bible study group, and in recent months we studied the letters of Peter to the church. Peter is, in many ways, a John Wayne figure in Christian circles. He's the guy, the rough-hewn fisherman who left his business, his thriving small business, and followed Jesus. He was the guy who pulled out his sword and lopped off the soldier's ear in the Garden of Gethsemane before the crucifixion. He also was the guy who denied knowing Jesus as things got nasty that night. But he also became the leader of the church after Pentecost. These letters of Peter were written in the final years of his life when he was living in Rome. He knew he was facing a lot of persecution, and his fellow Christians were, and he knew that Nero was coming for him and he was probably going to die at Nero's hands, which he did. He was crucified upside down and I think burned, very torturous death. And if you read Peter's letters to the church, he was very woke. He was very woke about being kind, being forgiving, avoiding conflict, and not being confrontational, not being unkind, So I mean, read 1 Peter 4, and he's pretty woke. So.
The woke John Wayne.
Yeah.
That's pretty incredible. I guess we can move on unless you have anything else to say about that. I guess that's the answer that puts things the most sharply. It's just, it's not really how did Christianity get so tied to republicanism, but how did republicanism change so much?
Right. Yeah. Exactly. I mean, and part of it is the culture of power. I mean, Jerry Falwell was very much about gaining political power and reaching through his Christian followers to do it. You look at James, the guy who just died. He was a founder of the Family Forum, James Dobson. Very much about gaining political power, becoming powerful in Washington, influencing policy in Washington. And he did it through his Family Forum. And you find it in where the money's flowing as well. Locally, the DeVos family who proclaim themselves to be Christians, and I don't doubt that they are, or their beliefs are. They study the Bible and have formed a political action committee designed to promote the election of like-minded Republicans.
I imagine if I had $1 billion, I would form a political action committee to promote the election of people I liked.
Well, yeah, I mean, the great evil for them is George Soros, who has a lot of money and holds opposite views. They view him as being someone who's evil, not...
But equally powerful.
Equally powerful, yeah. And demonizing your opponents is becoming acceptable or normalized by the MAGA movement, and that's troubling.
Yeah. There's been, I think I'm a little bit ignorant in political discussions because I have for so long made policy lectures on YouTube, which is how I mostly think about politics when I'm, when I'm making these things. When someone asks, which side are you on, and I'm like, what do you mean? Like, what policy are we talking about here? Like, give me a policy, and then we can talk about it. But for the vast majority of people, that's not what they mean when they talk about politics. They don't mean, how should we reform transportation, or what should the local tax policy be? That's not what they mean. It seems like it is more emotional and about teams and about in groups and out groups. Which
is why our governor is, ran on let's fix the damn roads.
That's one thing we should all be able to.
That's all we can all agree on that.
Yeah. Have you seen this shift, especially over the course of your journalistic career or just your life, in politics being about policy to politics being about teams? And is that just a recent thing, or have you seen that move over the 90s, 2000s?
Yeah, I mean, early on, back to the 70s, it became pretty apparent that one of the primary goals of every politician is to get reelected. Term limitations were put into place to kind of backstop that or stop that from happening, because when I was covering Lansing in the 70s, we had state legislators who had been there for generations, and they dictated policy because they achieved positions of power through seniority, and people view that as harmful because it prohibited new voices. Now, many people would argue that term limitations has basically castrated elected officials and turned it over to the moneyed interests, because they still want to get elected, but they can't run on their reputations as much as who funds their politics. And politics has become much more of a money game, and the question is who's giving you the money to run, and to what extent you're beholden to them. And the MAGA movement has really magnified that, because now you need the MAGA movement behind you as a Republican in order to get anywhere. to some extent, that battle played out a few years ago when an extreme element of the MAGA movement tried to take over the Michigan Republican Party, and it failed mainly because the big money walked away. You had these folks who were promoting some really extreme ideologies, and the large funders, which included like the DeVos family, just turned off the tap. The Democrats still had money. They were very successful in the election that saw us getting Governor Whitmer, Dana Nessel as Attorney General, a Secretary of State who was Democratic, a Democratic U.S. Senator, and in West Michigan, a Democratic congressperson. A lot of that was the failure of the MAGA movement, or actually it's the old Tea Party element, to get the big check writers in the Republican Party to back them. So now they've formed a PAC which they're hoping will give them candidates who are less radical.
Sure. Yeah. Final question.
Okay.
Big question, anyway. Maybe not the last follow-up, but speaking about the billionaires in Grand Rapids specifically,
Right.
And even more specifically, because I think we have a few in Michigan, but the DeVos and Van Andels, this is something I shot you in an email. I said they get a lot of hate, which is what I've heard. I've heard a lot of people hating on them. And you said, well, there's a lot of admiration as well.
Right.
You know? Do you see both?
Yeah. I mean, they're aspirational for a lot of people. You look at the names on the buildings around here. Meyer, some of the Meyer people associated with Meyer, Earl Holton, he was a Meyer executive. They're on the hospitals, the DeVos Children's Hospital, the Van Andel Arena, the DeVos Center. They're viewed as great business success stories, and people admire that. Whether or not, despite their politics, these were very successful business leaders who also gave back to the community. You don't see that in other communities to the extent you see it here, whereas you've got all of these wealthy people giving back to the community and giving back amenities to the community that are very much appreciated. Last night I was at a concert at Meyer Gardens. Beautiful, beautiful facility, beautiful, great place to watch a concert.
It's one of the few places when people ask, should I go to Grand Rapids? I say, not really. There's nothing here except Meyer Gardens. That's the one place I think it's hard to find a similar thing anywhere else.
Well, you should also tell them to watch a Lake Michigan sunset.
Beautiful. But if you're near to the ocean, stay near the ocean. That's my take on the lakes.
We don't have salt, though.
That's true. Pros and cons. We don't have seafood either. So,
have you had walleye from the?
We do have lake food.
Yes.
Lake food. That's true.
No, the walleye. There's anyway, but
we got salmon. Yeah, we got
salmon and walleye and perch. Lake Michigan perch, freshwater perch. If you haven't had it fresh, you should. And
I do think it's under-celebrated.
Yes, and then even try smelt. Which is, are you familiar with these tiny little fishes that they pick out of the rivers by buckets in the spring? They're they're a real delicacy. So anyway, don't sell Michigan short. Don't sell West Michigan short.
Okay, that's fair.
But anyway, what were we talking
Meyer
about?
Gardens.
Yeah. No,
have given a huge amount of money to the
right,
community.
and there is a lot of admiration for them, and their names do speak of success, and people aspire to be successful. So the names on these buildings are from people who've done some very positive things for this community and have given back to the community. Irregardless of politics. I mean, you look at the Meyer family, other than Peter, brief foray into politics, they're fairly apolitical, and they're certainly not religious. The Myers family has not ever been religious in any of their political or just their rhetoric. I mean,
in their public face.
Right. Yeah.
There could be whatever privately, but that's not
right. No, and it's intentional. Fred Meyer, his father came to West Michigan from the Netherlands and was, I believe he was an anarchist. He lived in Greenville and ran a hardware store, and the store next to him opened up, and he said, well, let's sell some groceries out of that building that's not being used, and the rest is history. It's an interesting history.
Yeah, I think this is an interesting thing, that there's so much hate for the Amway families and so little for Myers, despite the fact that they're both rich. I don't know if because groceries seems more wholesome than, pyramid scheme, perhaps, or maybe people go to Myers so they have something in their heart that's, I don't know what that is.
Yeah, and they're Fred Meyer, the son of the founder, who died, and the founder of the Frederick Meyer Gardens, was a very generous, well-liked person. If you knew Fred Meyer, it's hard not to like the guy. And you've got all these Fred Meyer bike trails around here, Meyer Gardens. You've got a Meyer Nature Center out on the northeast side of the county, on Pickerel Lake. So they were very generous, and it's a well-run company. The Amway, the founder, Amway, in a large respect, were much more political, and so they became much more of a lightning rod for people who looked at politics and are confrontational about politics.
That makes sense. Just the more that you put yourself out in the public spotlight,
right,
especially intentionally and publicly,
right,
the more hate you're going to get. That's
sure,
nearly inevitable.
Yeah. And there's others. The Secchia Medical Center. Basically Michigan State's College of Human Medicine. Peter Secchia was a big benefactor of that. Peter Secchia burst onto the scene. He was a lumberman, and burst on the scene politically during Jerry Ford's presidency, when he was characterized as Jerry Ford's best friend, and he took that friendship and turned it into a political platform, which fueled a lot of conservative Republicans for a generation. But Peter himself was very confrontational about politics and kind of a win mentality that he had, which was interesting.
For sure. So the last question to kind of tie this all together, and I wouldn't even probably bring up here, except that you said that this is the question. You could describe the early church as communist in some ways, socialist in some ways, in terms of sharing everything, welcoming everyone. Like you say, Peter was woke. That was some of the heat that Christians got in the beginning was they did welcome everyone, like women and slaves, like everyone.
Yeah. Well, that was a reflection of the society they lived in. So you'll read through Peter's letters, and he was encouraging slaves, be good to your slave masters, because, slavery was well accepted back then, and Christianity was one of the few movements to recognize the humanity of slaves. And at that time in the Roman Empire, if you were a slave, you were the property, literally the property of your slave owner. Today we have cars, the car's titled into your name, and you can do whatever you want with that car. Back then, if you had a slave, that slave was in your name, and you could do whatever you want with that slave. Christianity was one of the few movements in the Roman Empire to recognize the human status of slaves. And so now you read it, and Paul, and all of the epistle writers said, slaves, be the best slave you can be, because that's the circumstance you find yourself in. And they also wrote, slave owners, be good to your slaves, treat them like the people they are, not like, the property that the law allows you to have them. So, it reflected their times,
Right.
Now, I can't think of an example of what a gospel writer or an epistle writer might say today towards one of the, but...
Well, yeah, I think any progressive movement is progressive compared to the time that you live in.
Right.
Like, that's just how it is. I think the big one at the time will be factory farms. I think that will be the thing that in 50 years everyone looks back on as, like, the major Holocaust.
Really?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I absolutely think that will be the case. I should say I hope that will be the case, because I hope we don't have factory farming in 50 years. We'll see how that plays out, but that's certainly what I hope. But so actually the question is just this, that we're talking about money and politics and Christianity, in America and Grand Rapids, and about, the clear message that, the Bible gives for how your relationship should be with money, and that was given in, again, a certain context. And you could see this commandment, something like, sell all you have and give it to the poor, as being something that would maybe be wise to follow in a certain very specific context, which might be something like you're part of a big community and you do a lot of work and everyone takes care of each other, and it's, maybe a little bit more of a tribe where you do have all of your needs met, from child care to elderly care to food preparation to, all the things that you're doing to contribute to the community, housing, everything. In other words, a very, very, very different society than the one we live in now, which is individualistic and capitalistic, right? So again, this isn't a critique of socialism or capitalism, right? But I'm wondering, do you think that these values of the early church can really be alive today in modern American capitalism, where, if I literally took that advice, gave everything I had and gave it to the poor, you could say for a day or two, wow, what a good guy, but ultimately I think everyone would agree that's not a wise move.
Well, and we're not called to do that as Christians. We are called to participate in the church and into our community of believers and our larger communities. We're called upon to, as Christians, tithe, and that's so you've got you've got a lot of stuff, but really it's not yours. What are you going to do with it? And to what extent do you use it to help others? We're called to help others. We're called to live in community, not by ourselves. We're not just storing up all our grain in barns for ourselves. We are called to live in community. Now, to what extent we support people who live in community in our community, and what is our community is a big question. I mean, Cain and Abel, going right back to Genesis, who's my brother, and in some circles, who's my brother is the answer. Unfortunately, is well, white people like me. People who belong to the same church as it. That's as far as it goes. That's really not as far as Jesus took it. He took his disciples on a road trip and went through a region called Samaria, which was considered hostile territory to the Jewish culture in which he was a rabbi. And they said, let's stay out of there. And he said, let's go through there. They stopped to get water at a well, and there was a woman at the well who was there in the heat of the day because she was a social outcast. She was, for a variety of reasons, she was viewed as an immoral person and someone you wouldn't spend any time with. And Jesus took time, spent it with her, and shared the good news of the gospel with her, and helped her and raised her self-esteem. And the church leaders at the time said, "Oh, he shouldn't be talking to her. She's unclean. We don't associate people with people like that." So Jesus' example was, we're all flawed, and we all need to help each other, and forgiveness is available to all. Even when he was on the cross, dying, the guy who was dying next to him for a crime that was viewed as a capital offense by the community, asked to be forgiven, and Jesus said, "Today you will be with me in heaven." Jesus was pretty non-discriminating as far as who he hung out with, which he hung out with tax collectors and other people who were viewed as undesirables, and I don't know if that answers your question.
I think it does. I think sometimes I approach these topics a little bit black and white.
Mm-hmm.
How can we have the perfect example of X or Y or Z? But yeah, I mean, certainly there's things Jesus calls us to do. There's plenty of ways we can act that out in our lives.
Mm-hmm.
Plenty of ways we can act them out in society. Some ways that society could change as well to be better.
Right.
Separate questions.
Yeah.
And so there's maybe not a need to walk around criticizing everything because you have some idea of utopia in your head that doesn't exist.
Okay.
Which I do sometimes.
Yeah.
That's a fault of mine.
Well, we all screw up. We all, walk around doing, as Paul wrote, the good that I would, I do not. The good that I, or Yeah, and it was something like that. We're a walking paradox.
That quote, and again, a semblance of the quote, lives in my head all the time. The sin is even things you could do that are nice. It doesn't have to be just hating people and robbing people.
Yeah.
So it could be just helping someone out and you didn't do it.
That's
something I think about quite a bit.
Yeah, and it's a judgment call every time, and what do you base that judgment on your where Jesus and others called on us not to judge. Don't be judgmental. We don't know what's going on the other side of the conversation, and being judgmental is not where we're called to go as Christians. We're called to be compassionate. We're called to be generous. We're called to be kind, not judgmental and harsh and bullying those who are less fortunate than us.
Good words to end on. Thank you so much for your time.
Well,
this has been
I came in here presenting myself as an experienced newsman, and instead I'm ending up as a Bible study leader, which is what I'm doing, spending more time doing now. So I apologize for that, but that's where I'm at.
Part of that is on me as an interviewer, but part of it is also just this format that it's just a conversation.
Right.
It doesn't have to be anything more. I don't have an editor telling me to get this quote to fit in this place in the story. It's just a conversation.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting because, like I said, I spent 45 years in the news business, and have always seen this clash of values, it's just there, and it's there in almost every situation you find yourself in. That requires some sense of judgment you make. What are you basing that judgment on? Shareholder values or spreading the good news? And mission. That's why I love telling the Zondervan story, because that's a classic where you had some really shrewd, sharp businessmen selling Bibles, becoming incredibly successful in Bibles, selling their Bibles, but in the end, Rupert Murdoch is selling those Bibles today. Not those guys.
Yeah, it is. It is fascinating, and as you say, it's everywhere.
Yeah.
So that's maybe why a lot of people are talking about it and thinking about it, because it's everywhere.
Yep. All right.
This is good.
Good.
I don't know how exactly I'm going to edit this or what it's going to look like.